everybody. Welcome to our second session of our 2021-2022 webinar series. I am Becky Schwartz, and my co-host is Jeremy Heiler. I'll let him introduce himself on Tuesday. I'm going to let him introduce himself before I make a fool out of myself even more, and then he'll introduce our fantastic guest this evening.
It's Tuesday going on Friday, right,
Yeah.
Becky?
Yes.
So welcome, everybody. I'm Jeremy Heiler. I am a former middle school teacher, and I am currently the manager of educational partnership for the Center for the Collaborative Classroom. We are happy to have Megan here, all the way from Chicago. And she's going to talk about helping struggling writers and English language learners in physical and virtual classrooms, because we all know that we're doing the flip-flop right now. Some of you are probably in a virtual and some of you are probably face-to-face. So we'll let Megan introduce herself and we'll get going.
Yes, thanks a lot for making time to be here tonight. My name is Megan Kowalski. I am a Chippewa River Writing Project teacher consultant since 2009. Currently, I am a special education teacher in Chicago, Illinois, and I'll be your host this evening. So you can contact me through my Gmail address or reach out to me on Twitter. If you have any questions during the presentation tonight, please feel free to speak up and ask them right away as they come up. You don't need to wait until the end of the presentation. I was just telling everyone, I'm very used to being interrupted as a special education teacher. I have lots of very impulsive and chatty kids, which keeps the day interesting. So please feel free to stop me as we go through. So to kind of get us started tonight, I just wanted to begin by asking you to tell me a little bit about how you differentiate. So there is a Google Doc that I'm going to give you the link to. And actually, let me give you the link to the presentation as well. And you can go ahead and type right into the document. We'll see what you're doing in your classroom to differentiate. Or if you're not really sure what you're going to do to differentiate, what do you think is not differentiation? One of the things that I really like to ask my students for are non-examples. So you can give me some examples and non-examples of differentiation for yourself. And then I think that differentiation is one of those things, it's a buzzword, and I feel like a lot of people don't exactly have a handle on what it means. So you kind of end up feeling like this guy here in front of your classroom. You've got this big mess going on. You're trying to differentiate and do something for each student in the room. But I think that it can be very simple sometimes. And you can end up, your room might look like mine is right now. So in this photo here, I've got one of my groups from this year. Everything is differentiated, but they're all studying for a passage reading fluency assignment. So each kid has a passage that's been leveled for them and that they're going to practice for a number of days before reading it out loud to me so that we can track their progress over the course of the year. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's really, really complicated. So I kind of have 4 contentions in this presentation tonight that I felt really guided what I wanted to talk to you about. So the first thing is to keep your expectations high and get ready to invest some time. With English learners and with students with disabilities and just with students who have not experienced a lot of success in school yet, it's going to take some time to get them there. And I think that that's okay. We're not looking at dumbing down the content. We're not looking at simplifying things. We're kind of remapping how we're going to ask kids to get to that end point. So they're still going to end up in the same place as the rest of the students in their classroom. They just might have taken a little bit different of a route to get there. I think the next thing that you want to do as much as possible in your classroom is to validate thinking. So for a lot of our students, they can't necessarily easily express ideas in writing, right? And for students with disabilities and English learners, that's a whole nother level of difficult. And there are times where they're going to turn in a writing assignment and it's almost unintelligible, you know, especially if it's that first draft or it's something where they're just kind of answering a question on the spot in class. What you can do as the teacher to kind of give them that carrot and make sure that they feel like they are on the right track is validate the thoughts. So even if the writing is not very good, even if the idea is a little bit underdeveloped, you can still say like, you're on the right track here. Your thinking is correct. There are even times where I'll get students that give me an answer that's wrong, and I'll explain why that wrong answer actually does still make sense. You know, so I'm like, you're wrong. No part of this was right. But when I think about how you might have gotten to that answer, it really makes sense to me. So what you're doing is not illogical. It's just not quite getting you to the right point. So let's backtrack. I think that the other thing that I really try to do in my classroom is find opportunities to build fluency and to let kids enjoy writing and thinking. So as much as possible, I'm trying to break down writing the way that we often break down math instruction. And, you know, where we're giving kids opportunities to just practice working with the numbers. I think we want to do the same thing in terms of asking them to write and asking them to think. Give them opportunities where they're just going to be able to do those things and maybe kind of have a good time doing it. And then I think the last thing that you definitely want to keep in mind is a clear prompt and a strong mentor text are the key to like getting kids to produce good work. A lot of times when I have students that are struggling, the prompt is just very, very broad. And especially with some of my gen ed colleagues who are maybe not feeling quite as confident as teachers of writing, they'll give a prompt that's really broad, thinking like, okay, I want every student to be able to come up with something kind of different. And what ends up happening is a lot of the kids just come up with really broad ideas. And it's hard for them to kind of narrow it down. So make sure that your prompt is very, very straightforward, and then give them that strong mentor text that's written by you, and then maybe some examples from students as well, if it's an assignment that you're repeating. So I'm going to give you 4 tips to kind of live out those contentions in your own classroom. So tonight I want to talk about the routines and procedures that I use in my room, and how I translate those into a virtual space so that your classroom environment is really, really functional. And able to kind of shift between virtual and in-person spaces. I want to talk about templates in my favorite book in the whole wide world. They Say, I Say. It's not my favorite book in the whole wide world, but it's a great book for teaching writing. And they talk a lot about how to use templates to help kids draft. We're going to go into Hyperdocs, which I learned about from Jeremy Heiler. I think that they're a really great tool to make sure that your students' support system is also able to give them extra support and to kind of push kids for independence. I think that when you're using a Hyperdoc for assignments, kids are able to go back and access material easily. It's kind of a one-stop shop for them. And so that helps lead them into a higher level of independence. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about tonight is using visuals and finding ways to use what students can do to measure their understanding. Okay, so in terms of routines and procedures, this is a panoramic view of my classroom. And I'm going to kind of just walk you through the way that things are set up so that students are able to follow along, keep themselves organized, and we can get right to work in class. I think one of the things that really helps, especially English learners, is just following that same routine every day. So that they're not having to wait for verbal prompts or kind of break down verbal instructions on what they're supposed to be doing. If they know this is the expectation every day, it makes it a lot easier for them to focus on, you know, getting down the academic content and the academic language. Thank you, Cara. So kids come in the door over here. This is our doorway. They know that every Monday they've got to come over here to this milk crate and pick up their work from what I call their file. So I use the files to kind of cut down on time handing out papers or handing back assignments. Everything goes in the file, and then they're expected to just pick it up each Monday. Once they go to their file, they move back over into this section here where we've got what we call our bins. And then next to the bins, they've got their laptops. So they take everything from their file and they sort it into the correct folder in their bin so that things are all in the right place. A lot of times there's so much wasted time in classrooms just trying to get kids organized, finding the right materials, and then, you know, keeping track of that stuff over the course of even a few days can be really, really challenging. I teach a lot of middle school. So for sixth graders that are coming from fifth grade where they were in one room all day, you know, with one teacher, to coming now to middle school where they're in 4 rooms with 4 teachers and, you know, 4 kind of different styles. They just really struggled to keep track of their stuff. And you end up losing a lot of time kind of getting kids to figure out where things are. And I think that it makes for kind of a chaotic experience. So if you can build some really good routines and procedures, you can make sure that kids have the stuff that they need so that you're going to be able to focus on the content and on the writing. So like I said, Mondays, we pick up all our work. And then throughout the course of the week, we kind of work through the same routine. There are times where Monday isn't necessarily like, oh, the day that we're reading and doing pictorials of our chapter. We take as long as we need to take, but we always kind of do things in that certain order. So every day starts with a phonics warm up and a phonics activity. I'm getting kids that are significantly below grade level. So they really need some of that remedial support in terms of reading. There's missing like phonics rules that they need to be retaught. So they're practicing phonics and fluency at the beginning of every day. And then from there, we kind of go through a process of reading and summarizing what we've read. They do a little bit of a comprehension check. They do some vocabulary work, and then they do some what I call constructed responses, which are our writing tasks. And some days there will be, you know, the reading is really short. We get through it really quickly. We do reading and, you know, vocab and the summarizing and the vocab in one day. Other times the reading is really hard and we end up spending, you know, 2 or 3 days of that week on the reading. And that's okay. So I think to make your routines and procedures really work, one thing that I want to recommend to you is considering a Google site, particularly in place of Google Classroom. If you've got kids that are sort of new to Google Classroom or new to having multiple teachers, I think Google Classroom can be really, really overwhelming. Mainly because of the email features, and the kids are not good at turning on and off how they get email from Google Classroom. So they're either missing really important stuff because they've turned off everything, or they're getting, you know, anytime you post anything or anyone posts anything on Google Classroom, they're getting emails, and it's just hard for them to keep up with. So I ended up transitioning early in the pandemic from Google Classroom to a web page. And this makes for another nice one-stop shop for my kids. So we've got all of our kind of announcements on the front page. And then the places that they really spend the most time are here in their grade levels page. You can see for 4th and 5th, I've only got math classes. So I'm going to take you into my 6th and 8th page. But I keep everything up here at the top. They've got copies of every single thing that we're going to be working on for that week. And I try to put extra stuff too, just in case we get a little bit ahead. That's a nice gift that you can give to yourself, is to be a little bit ahead on the copies. And the nice part about this is if kids have lost stuff, I can say, okay, you've got to open it online and do the digital copy instead. So I have a lot of kids that still really prefer the paper and pencil. I have a few kids that are a little bit hard to manage online, and they end up on websites that I'm not really sure why they went there. In the middle of the school day, they're watching something on YouTube, which isn't necessarily inappropriate, but not at all related to the assignment. So different kids will go through periods of what I call a ban on their computer. So everything is posted right here on our homepage. And the thing that I really like about this is that their parents can access it. So if we're, we've got like a vocab study on GimKit, they can go home and play that GimKit to study by themselves. We've got under the math side, I have lots of videos that explain the concepts. So if parents are trying to help the kids at home, they can see, the exact video we watched, what it had to say, and how they practiced a certain skill. So it's another good way to make sure that kids are going to have the materials that they need. You're kind of pre-planning for kids to lose stuff because that's just kind of part of the game in middle school. I know that, on any given day, I'm going to have a kid who has lost something really important that I needed them to have for class. And so having it ready to go on a website, I think will really help you and them. So, okay. Templates. Yes, thank you, Becky. I think it is pre-planning for high school. I'm thinking a lot too about what I do in middle school and how it's going to translate. I think that some teachers feel like I do a lot of hand holding, and I would agree. I do quite a bit of hand holding, but if they really have no idea where to go, like, you got to grab their hand for a little while. So, my plan is to start them off with a lot of support, and maybe we're holding hands and walking together the whole way. But by the end of the year, to really scaffold that back and to have everything set up so that eventually they don't have to rely on me giving them the prompts to do it. So the next thing that I really want to encourage you to think about are templates. And I think templates can be a really, really hard sell. Especially for writing teachers that maybe don't feel super confident as writing teachers or as writers themselves. I think the thing that I hear most commonly from my colleagues in school is like, well, isn't it kind of cheating? Like, am I giving them the words? I'm not sure how I feel about this. And I would argue that what you're doing with a template really is giving kids space to focus on the big ideas that they're going to talk about in their paper, instead of agonizing over, the transitions and the topic sentences and these little things. So I've got a book to movie comparison essay with a rubric and a template here. I'm going to show you my template and then explain how I have kids kind of customize and personalize it. So last year we read Freak the Mighty and watched the movie that goes with it, The Mighty. I like to try to pick a book every year that features a main character with a disability. So this was one of the books that we used last year that featured a character with a disability. And they, of course, always love the movie assignments. So we got to read the book, we watched the movie, and then what I asked them to do was identify similarities and differences, and then analyze whether or not these were good changes that were made from book to movie. And if you scroll through my template, it is very simple. They're all going to sound exactly alike. But I would argue for the first draft, that's not a huge deal. And I also, for kids that are higher, so if you're working in an inclusion classroom, and you're giving the template to every kid, it's okay to tell kids you don't have to stick to the template. This is here to help you think, use the parts of it that make sense for you, and change the parts that don't. So we stick to the template pretty closely for that first draft. And then as we work through the essay assignment, what I do is focus usually on, one particular part of the essay. So I'll provide word banks, for example, for transitions. And we'll look at that word bank together. We'll talk about transitions. And then we usually go back into the template and into my mentor text and say, like, all right, where do we see some of the, transitions that I used? And it's like on the template, the nice thing is it's always the same. So I don't vary the transitions for them. I use the same transition in every single section. And then to help them revise and edit, we use that word bank. And I say, okay, like so here's some transition words that would go with compare and contrast. Think about whether you could switch to these, or pick the ones that you think sound a little more like you. And then it makes for an easier revision process, because you're able to give them something that is very straightforward. Again, like it's a mathematical way of trying to approach the writing. So you're giving them something, you know, that's very straightforward, a very small step, but it's definitely going to personalize and customize their essays. Another thing that I'll do is give them sentence stems and say, like, maybe you want to replace some of my sentence stems that I put in the template for you with other stems. And so in this case, this was just something that I found on Pinterest. Sometimes I'll write them myself, but I'm also, I really don't want to reinvent the wheel. And there's a lot of good stuff on the internet. So if you follow a couple of decent teacher blogs, some people are really good about posting materials there. But my favorite way is just to kind of scroll through Pinterest when I'm having a long day at lunch. And I just pin stuff and I don't really think about like, oh, I'm going to use it for this assignment. I go back then later onto my board and say, okay, what do I have pinned that maybe I could use with this? Or, you know, which blog did I read that maybe I could go back to and find some stuff. And something that I really liked about this set of stems is that they're leveled. So we've got kind of just right, which are the most straightforward, simple stems, middle of the road where they get a little bit more involved. And then finally, you know, kind of up for a challenge. So definitely more advanced. And the kids can decide which ones they want to use and even whether they really want to use them. So they can always decide to stick with the template and then kind of customize it from there as we revise. But if they're not digging the template and they don't feel like it really works for them, there's other options if you give them those set of stems. And that's something that I really like about They Say, I Say, is they give you specific sentence stems for all different kinds of academic writing. Someday there's going to be a middle school version of They Say, I Say, I hope. But I would say that it's really written for college level writers, but I think that a lot of the information in it is still applicable and really easy to use with middle school and, you know, possibly even younger writers. I don't know that you'll be able to use all of the stems exactly, but the ideas and just looking at the ways that they've developed the stems, I think could really do that. I would love to be a co-author on that. Okay, so the next section that I wanted to talk about is Hyperdocs. So my students, we discovered Hyperdocs last year as we were kind of struggling through the course of the pandemic and trying to find things that were exciting and new, but also were kind of, you know, pushing kids to really write and to really take ownership over the work that they were doing. So Hyperdocs was a great way to do that. I would encourage you to consider joining the Hyperdocs community. So I'm going to take you to their website quickly first and just give you a little taste. So you can sign in here. Their philosophy is teachers give teachers. And they encourage you to create Hyperdocs and post them there so that other people can use them. And it's just unlimited, really, I think, what people have been able to do with Hyperdocs. And it's really fun to see what people have come up with. I'd say if you're just getting started, I would just browse through and find one that you kind of want to try out with your class. Yes, thank you, Troy, for the archive from Jeremy's. Jeremy did a session on Hyperdocs last fall that was really, really good. So if you're not familiar with Hyperdocs, you think you might want to use them, I definitely check that out. And then just start looking for a Hyperdoc that you think might be workable in your class. There's a lot of really like fun ones for those days, kind of, you know, I'm thinking like really right before Thanksgiving break, Halloween, those holiday days where you're trying to find something engaging for the kids, but you know that like they want to talk a lot, they want to be really active, they're looking for something novel to feel engaged at school. That's a great day to introduce a Hyperdoc because it's so interactive. And there's just tons and tons of them on all subject areas. And then if you create some of your own Hyperdocs, you will be encouraged to share them on the website, and then other teachers will be able to use them. So I use Hyperdocs for my bigger assignments. So I'm working this year on transitioning all of my kind of like end of unit or middle of the unit big projects into Hyperdocs. I think it makes it's a little bit of work up front for me, but it makes it a lot more accessible for the students overall. And then this is really a great way to make sure that your student support system has full access to everything that they're going to need in order to be able to provide students with that extra help at home. So I'm going to show you a Hyperdoc that I did for one of my projects. So last year we read The Lightning Thief, another book that features a character with a disability. And we did a research project using StoryMap. So if you've read the book, you know that it includes a road trip. And so what I had kids do was a little bit of research on each site or each stop along the way in the road trip, and then write about that in a story map. So you can see it lays out what the assignment is. It's going to have them kind of explore the different parts of the assignment. I've given them lots of links. I've got videos in here, websites. So they can play with these links to get started with their research. And then it's got more information about exactly what I'm looking for in the assignment, a link to the rubric, and then my mentor text is embedded in there as well. And then this is really helpful because you can post it on your website. So students are going to have access to it digitally at any time that they need it. And parents or siblings or whoever is supporting the kid at home can also access this and be kind of taken step by step through your project or assignment, which is something that I really, really like about Hyperdocs. And then something that I also like to do with the Hyperdocs is push kids to go into their Hyperdoc first. So if they come to me with a question about the assignment, or they're like, what am I supposed to do now? I guide them back to the Hyperdoc. I'm like, well, what did the Hyperdoc say? And if they can tell me, oh, I read this part and it says this, then I'll give them a little bit of help. They clearly have more questions than just, what am I supposed to do? But a lot of them really, they're used to kind of relying on the teacher. They get very reliant on me or on, a couple of the kids in the class who are really good at kind of remembering procedures to tell them what to do next. But I think if you keep pushing them to go back to the Hyperdoc for themselves, that's really, really useful in building up that independence. And then another thing that's nice about the Hyperdocs is you can embed tutorials. So if you're using some technology that's difficult for kids, or you've got students that are English learners and maybe really need some kind of step-by-step support in accessing certain platforms, or setting up, certain things using English software, they can go ahead. Oh, good. A question on content of the Hyperdoc. I'm going to take that in just a second. They can go ahead and watch those tutorials as many times as they need to make sure that they know how to get there without having to call you over and explain what the question is. Okay, what's the question?
Yeah, so I wonder if you could pull your Hyperdoc back up for a moment. And having heard multiple teachers working with Hyperdocs and thinking, especially as you're talking about working with students who are English language learners and potentially special education students, or just any student for that matter, who might get overwhelmed, like, how do you find that balance? Like, you've clearly put a great deal of time and energy and content into the Hyperdoc, but then you said there are times where they might get lost and you're like, go back to the Hyperdoc and look at that. Where's that sweet spot for you? I don't want to take you too far off the course of your presentation and turn this all about Hyperdocs, but I'm just wondering if you might have any advice about how you try to structure those and how long it might stretch for a student. Like, it sounds like maybe you do one every week, and then like, how do you plan how much stuff to do in a week?
Yes, that's a great question. So usually the Hyperdocs are kind of towards the end of the unit. So we've got one about every month. 5, maybe 6 weeks, we work on a project that usually involves the Hyperdocs. And what I end up doing is on the first day when I'm introducing the new Hyperdoc, I give them, I'll literally set my timer and be like, you have 2 minutes, click on whatever you want to, scroll around, read what you want to read, like go for it. Usually I have a lot of trouble even with, the highest kids in the room, the highest academic kids in the room, kind of like focusing on one thing at a time in middle school. So when I first introduced the Hyperdoc, I let them go wild. And then we go back to the beginning and I break everything down. So I like to make everything as explicit and step by step as possible. I think a lot of students will get a document like this, and especially if they've been given time to start scrolling around, they get overwhelmed really quickly and they're like, I don't even know where to start. There's a lot of words here. I've clicked on all the links and I don't know what to do with these videos. So what I end up doing is walking them through really slowly each part of it. So we'd look at the engage section, we'd read that section. And then I'd say, okay, let's go into the explore and start looking at exactly what you're going to be expected to do. And we really just walk through each part step by step on that first day so that they have an overview of kind of where we're going to be going over the next few days. Or in this case, this Hyperdoc we actually worked with for about a week or for about a month as we read the book. So they'd get to that site on the road trip. They'd get to stop, do some research, watch their videos, blah, blah, blah. And then we'd go back into the book, read some more, and come back to do research later. So it was really broken up. But what I do is guide them to those specific parts of the Hyperdoc. So I say, okay, today they just left New York City. So this is where we're gonna begin our research. You need to work only from this section. And then I'll do check-ins, kind of as they're working on it and say, where are you at with your New York stop? What's your research? What can I support you with? And the nice thing about a Hyperdoc is it's all laid out up front. So if you have those kids that are early finishers, the I'm done kids, you can say, great, why don't you start previewing the next part of the Hyperdoc and see if you could figure out what we're going to do next. So it's all ready to go. And I think that it works well too as kind of a backwards design sort of project for you. Becky, what's your question?
Hi, so my quick question for you is you designed this for your classroom and you kind of, and when I say luxury, it's not really a luxury, it's more of a necessity. You have the necessity / luxury of pacing this just for the kids in your room. Yep. Speaking from a general ed teacher, when I give a Hyperdoc, they take my general education students, depending on how long I make it, 4-ish days to get through it. What are some of your tips for accommodating students with special needs in a co-taught general ed classroom when they're long like this? What are some of your tips and kind of tricks to how you would approach that in a general ed setting?
So in a general ed setting, I'd really do a lot of the same things that I'm doing in a special education setting. But what I'm going to do differently is really work with my co-teacher. So my co-teacher and I are going to sit down together and say, okay, what is like the essential thing that we want kids to practice in this assignment? And what we end up doing in an inclusion setting is still giving all of the kids that same assignment with the same expectation. But as we're watching kids work through it, we'll kind of adjust that expectation. So if we see that our English learners are working through things really, really slowly, we might say, okay, we're going to cut off, the last site for you, or you're not going to do Nevada and California. We're just going to grade you on the first 4 stops instead. Whereas students who are, kind of at the top of the class, getting a lot done, need some of that extension, we might say, you know what, we want you to add a new site to this. And where would you want to stop on the trip back to New York City from California? Where would you stop? And now you're going to take that research and get started by yourself. So it's really just about kind of customizing it as you go. And I think that that's really what, what good teaching is. Having a really strong plan and then being able to think on your feet and say like, okay, this plan is not exactly working for these people, so we're going to tweak it in this way. Yeah, I think that kind of answers the question. Any other questions on that? So I wanted to show you another Hyperdoc that's really, really different from mine. And this format that I used is actually a template that's right available on the Hyperdoc site. So you can download it and fill it in like that. You can also just download mine and delete from there and fill in your own stuff if you want to try that. But this was a really different one on algebraic expressions that I just thought was really cool. And I'm saving for my 8th grade group. We'll wait for it to load. This is bringing back memories of remote learning. So this is almost more of a game, really than an assignment like the Hyperdoc that I provided for you. But each of these has a different little activity that the kids can work through to get to the end. And they end up completing a short exit ticket that's through like Google form. So the Hyperdocs can be really, it's a really broad spectrum of stuff that's available to you. Some of it can be sort of like, little games, things that you kind of keep in your back pocket for those times where you've got downtime or where the lesson is just not going the way you want it to, and you got to shake things up on the spot. Or it can be a really, really structured thing, like more like mine was, taking them through that whole assignment. And then I really want to encourage you, if you're not, to use as many hyperlinks as you can and to start stretching your unit plans into Hyperdocs for yourself. So this is a unit plan that I wrote for ELA that we're working through right now. And you can see in my materials needed section, I've got everything hyperlinked so that I can go right there. I can get to the homepage from there. It's ready for anyone that I'm going to share my lessons with. It's ready for me. My admin are going to know exactly which things I'm using to supplement certain stuff, and they can easily look it up for themselves or share it with other teachers if that's what they want to do. So what you can do with Hyperdocs is really just endless. Okay, so the last strategy that I want to go over tonight is pictorials, what we call pictorials. And this is an idea that I learned about from the Wilson Reading System, which, if you're not familiar with, is a reading program that's kind of designed for people with dyslexia. It reteaches phonics, breaks down phonics rules to get people to a place where they are easily able to decode and encode what they're reading, which kind of is what we're also trying to do as teachers. But these are for students who maybe kind of missed the boat on some of the skills that they would have been taught in, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade to get a good handle on reading and making meaning of what they're reading. So we know that visuals are really, really important for our students with disabilities and for our students that are learning another language. So something that I like to do is use that pictorial to ask kids to create picture summaries of what they're reading. So like I was telling you earlier, we usually begin a week with quite a bit of reading. We do reading and pictorial at the beginning of every cycle. And so what the kids will do is create a picture summary, and it's a little bit tough actually to get them to create that picture summary. They're used to including a lot of words, and you can see in the example that I've got here, she's got some words, and we will use, maybe some speech bubbles here and there. But I tell them we want to limit words as much as possible, and we want this to remind us with pictures what happened in this text. So what I usually do to break this down for students is I'll begin by modeling it. And for my classroom, where I've got students that are struggling quite a bit, I might model it for weeks. And so we're gonna read a text together, and then I'm going to verbally summarize it and draw what I'm telling them to draw. And then they'll draw with me. So I've got my pictorial drawn, they've got theirs drawn. Usually their pictures are a lot cuter than mine. They're better artists. So that's a nice opportunity for them to outshine me too. And then we kind of keep scaffolding away from me being the one leading the pictorial. So once they're pretty good at that and they're starting to chime in and be like, oh, you forgot about this, or remember when this happened, or they're really sharing a lot of their pictures and able to talk about what they drew for their picture summary, I'll stop drawing for them and I'll just provide the verbal summary. So, you know, and this is where I ask them to chime into it. I'm like, okay, what happened at the beginning? Who's got something that they think we really need to draw? We'll talk about it. They draw it. We keep talking, drawing, kind of a back and forth. And then hopefully, and usually for me, it's like the last third or quarter of the year, they'll be drawing their pictorials without any prompting from me. And then what I do to check in and make sure that they're not just kind of doodling random things is, and they know that these are coming, we do random pictorial checks where I call them up, I ask them to show me the pictorial for different chapters or sections or texts. And I'll say, okay, like, tell me what happened, explain to me, you know, what you drew in your pictorial. And that works really, really well for kids. And it's also pushing them to make sure that they're visualizing the things that they're reading. So we know that a lot of our students with disabilities really struggle to visualize what's happening in the text. We talk about the movie in your mind. They're not naturally creating that movie in their mind the way that other kids might. So they need help developing that skill, and the pictorials are one way to help them develop that skill. And then I would say one of the best things that you can do for those students is let them use that drawing tool in other areas as well. So if it's really working for them and they want to start, you know, creating little icons that they're going to use to annotate the work that they're doing, great. let them annotate with some doodles in the corners as well. If you're giving a lot of graphic organizers and having kids work that way, there's no problem letting them, you know, begin by drawing in their thoughts. And then what I will do for kids is usually I'll have them start by drawing, especially for ELs. Like, we'll sit down and I'll invite them to speak to me in their native language. You know, I'll say, explain to me what happened. If it's easier for you in Spanish or Farsi or Polish, whatever it is, use that language. I'm not going to know exactly what you're saying, but I'm going to be able to tell by your picture what you're talking about. And then I want you to try to translate it into English for me. And when they translate it into English, I'll scribe. So I'll write in the graphic organizer for them so that they can come away with, you know, a graphic organizer that has some writing in it, that they didn't have to labor over the spelling, you know, or think about grammar and stuff like that, which a lot of kids get so hung up on. They won't write a word because, you know, they forgot how to spell school. And I'm like, you don't understand the way that the things that I have read and the spelling that I have seen for certain words, I'm going to be able to read your writing. But if you can have them do the picture, it's still really their, I think, authentic thinking. And then they can come away with that scribed response, which is going to help them get started on that longer draft. And then you can see here, this is just an example that I found online. It's a one-page Romeo and Juliet summary, which I think is really cute. When you have the kids, if you decide to try to use the pictorial strategy, I would encourage you to make sure that you've got a distinguishing feature for the different characters that you're drawing. So you can see, like, this character, we always give glasses. And that way we know, because for my students, we're usually doing the pictorial for a full novel too. So we're not just working on this story for one day, we're working on it over the course of a couple of weeks or months. We're going to be able to know on any page that this is a certain character. So we give them their little distinguishing characteristic. And then anytime that character comes back up, you know, we give them their glasses or, you know, their funny hairstyle or whatever it is. And then another thing that makes these pictorials really useful is when students are asked to write about a novel, they're able to use their pictorial to start to narrow down where they want to find evidence. So we're always pushing them, right, to go back into the text, to find those pieces of text evidence, to use a quote. And we know for our students with disabilities and our English learners, that's very overwhelming. And they're asking us a lot to help them find the chapter or find the place in the book where they can use, they can find the example that they're looking for. The pictorials are a nice way to push them to be a little bit more independent in that, because we can say, okay, let's just flip through, we had 20 chapters in this book. Let's flip through your 20 pictorials and look for that picture. And then that's going to tell them, okay, now I'm narrowed down to chapter 17 instead of flipping through the whole book and hoping that they find the right page, or standing there waiting for me, to flip through the book and give them some page numbers. Yeah, so we get really into our pictorials. You want to keep them simple. I never do color. I don't ever let the kids use color. Sometimes they really, really want to, but we say these are really supposed to be quick. We can get creative and make them cute, but we don't have time to color them in. And that's kind of one of our favorite activities. Any questions so far? Okay, so I want to go into the recommended resources kind of before we start to wrap things up for tonight. So one book that I want to recommend for you is called Rethinking Disability. If you are someone who doesn't feel super confident in working with students with disabilities, or has a lot of questions about how to incorporate students with disabilities into your classroom, I think that this is a really practical book. And this is the older edition. I linked to the older edition because the newer edition is like $50 and you can get this one used for a lot cheaper. This is the edition I read. I haven't read the newer edition. I would still recommend that you start with this one, unless you are just looking to spend that extra cash. But this will break down kind of different disabilities, ways to help students integrate fully into the class, and then kind of explains what's going on in the mind of a student with a particular disability. So it's very practical, very accessible. And then if you're working with students who are acquiring English, I think the WIDA Consortium is a really good place to start. It's very overwhelming. There's a lot of information on that site. You can sign up to get regular emails from WIDA, where they'll email you about updates as far as approaches for working with English learners, different models for teaching English as a second language or teaching English as an additional language. The thing that I find the most useful, especially as just a starting point on the WIDA Consortium, are the can-do descriptors. So I've linked right to that document specifically in my presentation, so that if you click on that, it's going to open this up. And then what this does is breaks down kind of where kids at certain ages would be if they were at this level. So I'm sure that you're all aware of the access test. Maybe some of you have given the access test. That is the test that measures English proficiency levels for our students. But we don't always have access scores for students as they're coming in to the classroom, especially if you end up in a school where there's a lot of newcomers. You're not going to get an access score at the beginning of the school year or in February when they joined your school. So the can-do descriptors can kind of give you a place to start. And so it gives you your grade level, and then it just goes through the 6 levels and kind of what we could expect in different areas. So we've got speaking, reading, writing, and then listening in every area. This little chart that I've given you has a space for names. So if you wanted to print it off and actually put your students' names in it, you could do that. So this is kind of a user-friendly document. But honestly, what I end up doing really for them, if it's not a newcomer and it's a kid that I have an access score, is I have a look at where they fell, which which level they would fall into. And then I just kind of glance through and see what are the can-do descriptors telling me that they are probably going to be able to do at this point in terms of English and interacting with English in the class. So questions. I feel like I dumped a lot of information on you. What questions can I answer?
Well, I'm always curious to know what kinds of projects or just products have your students created, knowing that they've been immersed in this kind of differentiation, and maybe even to come back and have you talk a little bit about your definition of differentiation could be interesting too. But what are some of the things that students have produced that you've just found incredibly compelling, or like, wow, I would have never expected it?
Yeah, I just had a student that submitted to the Scholastic essay competition about grief and loss. We did a digital storytelling project last spring where I had a whole Hyperdoc set up for them that kind of walked them through the process to create a digital story. And one of the stories that one of my students decided to tell was about how she had learned to play guitar because her grandfather was always playing his guitar for the family at different family functions, and she thought that was really cool and wanted to learn to play the guitar herself. And then she talked about losing her grandfather and how now being able to play the guitar is kind of a special remembrance for her. And that she actually was given one of her grandfather's guitars after he passed to play on, which this was just a kid who's like, she's really sweet, really shy, kind of avoids speaking up in class, doesn't necessarily get into a lot of really personal stuff, even when we're doing narratives. And it was like this assignment just fell kind of at the exact right time for her. And she really threw herself into it and just created something incredible. I have another student who really, really took it away on our Lightning Thief road trip Hyperdoc. And he's very hung up on us taking a road trip. And also learning how to create his own Hyperdoc. So at some point this school year, I am going to design some sort of project. I'm not sure exactly when, but some sort of project where the kids will be able to create their own Hyperdoc and create some of those tutorials and kind of see behind the curtain and realize what goes into the planning for some of those documents. So that's also really, really fun. And then I think, for me, differentiation is really just about trying to match your style of teaching to the student's needs. So I'm not going to be really, really effective as a teacher if I'm always doing something that doesn't feel right to me. So if I'm always kind of stuffing myself into the box, following the scripted curriculum exactly, doing only, what the district is recommending or, has decided is our new initiative for this, hour. I'm not doing my best work, and for the kids to get the most out of it, I need to feel like I'm doing my best work and I'm in a position to thrive. And if I'm there first, it's going to be easier for me to bring kids in and to say, okay, like, yep, I am really comfortable with this. I can see it's not really comfortable for you, 12-year-old person. Let me make some changes so that it does become comfortable for you. And you can join me over here in this space where I wanted you to be originally. So I think of differentiation is exactly what they do with the Waze app. If you've ever used Waze to get somewhere, where they'll keep rerouting you kind of around the traffic, and trying to find routes that make sense for you. So if you're a young driver and you don't want to take any highways to get there, or you, like me, are a cheapskate and you're like, no, I don't need to go through the tolls. Like, I'm going to save those $4. You can put all of that into your search terms, and it's going to help you take the route that meets those terms. And so that's what I'm trying to do as the teacher. The destination that they get to shouldn't be different. They shouldn't be stalling out halfway there and me saying, okay, you're fine. If they've stalled out halfway there and they need a ride the rest of the way there, then I'm going to come give them the ride. And I think that, that's true differentiation, where you're kind of creating whatever path the child needs to get to that end product or mastery of that end concept. Angela, the
Megan,
game Hyperdoc is from the Hyperdoc site. It is not mine. Yes. But there's so many like that. And there's so many really, really cute ones for like game days or holidays. So if you want to do like an escape room that's based on the landlady or, whatever, you can look that up on the Hyperdoc site, and there may be a really great Hyperdoc or several choices that meet that criteria. So definitely get familiar with the Hyperdoc site. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, Megan. I was just gonna say I appreciate just the work that you do with students. It's really inspiring, and it's really enjoyable to hear you talk about all the different pathways that you've created for your students to not get stalled in the middle of stuff and make it to that end goal of success. So, and you've changed my thinking on a couple of how to think about differentiation, which is really cool. So
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody who made time to be here tonight. I know that this is a busy time of year. I know that I dumped a lot of information on you tonight, but hopefully some of it will be really easy to implement and will be really helpful to your students. And please feel free to reach out to me through Gmail or on Twitter or here with the Chippewa River Writing Project. I'd be happy to talk with you more about strategies or questions as they come up.